Now let's look at some of the biggest players in this industry. One of the most well-known is Lockheed Martin. They are the world's largest defense contractors. In the 2020, they reported net sales of $65 billion. Their products including fighter jets, missiles, and the radar systems. Another major company is Raytheon Technologies. They specialize in the aerospace and the defense technologies. Their revenue in 2020 was $56 billion. Raytheon products produces missiles, drones, and the cyber security systems. Boeing is another name you might recognize. While known for their commercial aircraft, they have a significant defense division. In 2020, their defense segment brought in $26 billion. They make fighter jets, helicopters, and the satellite systems. Now, let's talk about how these companies make their money. The government contracts are a primary source of the income. The US Department of the Defense award billions in the contract each year. In 2020, the Pentagon's budget was $721 billion. A significant portion of this goes to defense contractors. But it's not just the US government buying this product. Many of these companies sell to other countries as well. This is called the international arms trade. It is a controversial practice, often criticized by the human rights groups. Let's look at some specific example of war profiting. During the Iraq War, Halliburton made headlines. They received billions in the no-bid contracts for service or services in the Iraq. This included everything from feeding troops to rebuilding oil fields. The company's former CEO was Vice President Dick Cheney. This led to the acquisition of the conflict of interest. Another example is Eric Prince, founder of Blackwater. Blackwater provided private security services in Iraq and Afghanistan. They made millions from government contracts. However, they face criticism for their action in the conflict zones. But it's important to note that war profiting isn't always about weapons. Some companies profit from reconstruction efforts. After a conflict, there are often a need of a rebuild infrastructure. This can include roads, bridges, and the government buildings. But the companies that specialize in the construction can make significant profit. Now, let's discuss the ethical concerns surrounding war profiting. Critics argue that these companies have a vested interest in the conflict. They say this could influence foreign policy decisions. There is also concern about revolving doors between government and the industry. Many former government officials end up working for defense contractors. Supporters argue that these companies provide necessary services. They say their products also protect soldiers and the civilians. They also point to the job created by the defense industry. Let's look at some attempts to regulate war profiting. In the US, there are laws against excessive profit from the war contract. The Truth in the Negotiation Act requires contractors to disclose their cost data. The Foreign Corrupt Practice Act prohibits bribing foreign officials. Internationally, there are efforts to control the arms trades. The Arms Trade Treaty aims to regulate international arms sales. However, not all countries have signed or ratified this treaty. Now, let's talk about autonomous weapons, or as some call them, as a killer robot. These aren't your typical movie villains. We are talking about real machines that could make life or death decision on their own. Let's start with the basic. What exactly are autonomous weapons? Simply put, they are military systems that can select and engage target without human intervention. Imagine a drone that can fly itself, identify enemy combatants, and decide whether to attack all its own. Sound impressive, right? But it's also pretty concerning when you think about it. Now, you might be wondering, why would anyone want to create such weapons? Well, there are a few arguments in favor of autonomous weapons. First, they could potentially reduce human casualties on the battlefield. Machines don't get tired, scared, or emotional, which might lead to a fewer mistake. They could also react much faster than humans in the critical situation. But here is where things get tricky. Just because a machine can make a decision quickly doesn't mean it will always make the right one. War is complex with many shades of the gray. Can a robot truly understand the context of a situation? Can it distinguish between a civilian and a combatant in a confusing, chaotic environment? Let's look at a hypothetical situation. Imagine an autonomous tank patrolling a war-torn city. It detects a movement in a building and identifies what it thinks is an enemy weapon. But what if it's a child carrying a toy gun? A human soldier might be able to make that distinction, but could a machine do that? This brings us to one of the biggest ethical concerns: accountability. If an autonomous weapon make a mistake and harms civilians, who is responsible? The programmer, the manufacturers, the military commanders who deployed it? It's a legal and a moral minefield that we are only beginning to navigate. Now, let's move on to the complex world of the private military contractors. But the private military contractors, or PMCs, have become a significant part of modern warfare. But what exactly are they? Simply put, PMC are private companies that provide military and the security services. These services can range from logistic and the training to actual combat operations. The use of PMCs has grown dramatically since the early 2000s. This growth was particularly noticeable during the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Let's look at some numbers to understand the scale of PMC involvement. In 2016, the US military had about 26,000 contractors in Afghanistan. This was compared to about 9,800 US troops. In other words, contractors outnumbered traditional soldiers by almost 3 to 1. So, why do governments and the organization hire PMCs? Well, there are several reasons for this trend. First, PMC offer flexibility. They can be deployed quickly without the need for lengthy political processes. Second, they can provide specialized skill that might be lacking in the regular forces. Third, using PMCs can help keep official casualties numbers down. This can be politically advantageous for the government. However, the use of the PMC is not without controversy. One major issue is accountability. PMC operates in the legal gray area, often beyond the reach of the military law. This can lead to the problem when contractors commit crime or human rights abuses. A notorious example is the Nisour Square massacre in Iraq in 2007. Employees of the PMC Blackwater killed 17 Iraqi civilians in Baghdad. This incident sparked outrages and raised questions about PMC's oversight. Another concern is the potential for conflict of the interest. PMCs are profit-driven entities. Critics argue that this could lead to prolonged conflict or unnecessary intervention. After all, war is their business. Let's take a closer look at some of the largest PMC in the world. G4S, based in the UK, is one of the biggest. They employ over 500,000 people worldwide. Another major player is Dycroft International, based in the United States. They have been involved in everything from the drug eradication in Colombia to police training in Iraq. But it's not just Western countries that use PMCs. Russia also has embraced this trend. The Wagner Group, a Russian PMC, has been active in Syria, Libya, and several African countries. Their operations often align closely with the Russian foreign policy objectives. PMCs don't just operate in the war zone, they also involve in the anti-piracy operations, protecting ships in the dangerous water. Some PMCs provide security for humanitarian operations in an unstable region. Others train local forces in the counter-terrorism tactics.